in the furthest reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus, where the light of the Astronomicon grows dim and the shadows between stars stretch like the fingers of forgotten gods, a silence has begun to fall. It is not the peaceful quiet of a world at rest, but the profound hush that precedes the final breath of empires. Ancient suns, once proud beacons that guided the ships of 1,000 worlds, now flicker with the uncertainty of candles in a gathering storm. Across this vast expanse of dying light, where the echoes of the Great Crusade have long since faded into whispers, the weight of eternity presses down upon those cursed with immortality. Here, in this realm of fading stars and crumbling dreams, we find ourselves drawn to witness the final act of a tragedy that has been millennia in the making. We truly love and care for you, dear listener, for in sharing this tale, we invite you into the sacred trust of memory itself. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. In the furthest reaches of the Segmentum Obscurus, where the light of the Astronomicon grows dim and shadows stretch between stars like the fingers of forgotten gods, a profound silence has begun to fall. It is not the peaceful quiet of worlds at rest, but the terrible hush that precedes the final breath of empires. Ancient suns, once proud beacons guiding ships across 1,000 worlds, now flicker like candles in a gathering storm. Across this vast expanse of dying light, where echoes of the Great Crusade have faded to whispers, the weight of eternity presses down upon those cursed with immortality. Here, in this realm of fading stars and crumbling dreams, we witness the final act of a tragedy millennia in the making. We truly love and care for you, dear listener, for in sharing this tale, we invite you into the sacred trust of memory itself. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now let's get started. Deep within the tomb world of Keth Morvac, past layers of adamantium and living metal, beyond chambers where millions of Necron warriors lay in eternal repose, Pharaon Zarathek the Eternal began his awakening. The process was neither swift nor gentle. Consciousness returned like molten metal cooling into form, each thought crystallizing with mechanical precision. His optical sensors flickered to life, casting emerald radiance across resurrection chamber walls, and with that first glimpse came the crushing weight of 65 million years of memory. He had ruled the Neolith dynasty when the galaxy was young, when flesh still clung to his bones and blood coursed through organic veins. He had witnessed the war in heaven consume star clusters, survived the Cetan betrayal, made the terrible choice of biotransference rather than face extinction. Through the Great Sleep, through the rise and fall of younger races, through crusades and heresies and the slow grinding of cosmic time, he had endured. But awakening now, Zarathek felt something he had not experienced since those desperate days before transformation. Genuine fear. His necrodermis form rose from the sarcophagus with fluid grace, each movement accompanied by perfectly calibrated servos. The body was a masterwork of Necron engineering, forged from living metal that could reshape itself at will, powered by energies that had outlasted civilizations. Yet for all its perfection, it felt hollow. Phantom sensations haunted him still. The memory of breath in lungs that no longer existed, the echo of heartbeats in a chest housing only cold machinery. The throne room had been carved from a single mountain of living crystal, its faceted walls designed to catch and reflect the light of twin suns that once illuminated Keth Morvac. Now those walls showed only darkness, their surfaces reflecting Zarathek's glowing form in an infinity of green-tinted mirrors. Where binary stars had cast golden radiance across crystalline pyramids and necrodermis spires, only the cold embrace of void remained. Data streams flowing through his consciousness painted a picture of systematic catastrophe. Across 17 sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus, stars were dying. Not the gradual dimming of red giants or spectacular violence of supernovae, but something far more unnatural. Their light was being drained away, siphoned by mechanisms his senses could barely comprehend. The stellar deaths followed a pattern, radiating outward from the galactic rim in a spiral of extinguished suns that spoke of intelligence, purpose, hunger that could devour light itself. From the deepest archives of his memory cores, a name surfaced: the stellar ossuary. It had been a theoretical construct during the height of Necron civilization, a device capable of storing the complete energy output of dying stars. The technology had been deemed too dangerous even by standards of a race that had sacrificed their souls for immortality. Yet someone had succeeded in building such a device, now using it to systematically drain light from the galaxy. The implications staggered him. If the pattern continued, entire sectors would be plunged into eternal darkness. Trade routes would collapse, worlds would freeze, and the delicate balance allowing younger races to flourish would be destroyed. But beneath these concerns lay something more personal. His dynasty had built tomb worlds around carefully selected stars, positioned to draw power from stellar radiation across geological ages. With their sons dead, his people would eventually exhaust stored energy reserves and fade into true death. The choice crystallized with mechanical clarity. He could accept this fate, allow his dynasty to follow the natural path toward extinction they had delayed for millions of years, or he could act, risking everything in desperate attempt to reclaim stolen light. The first path offered peace of acceptance, dignity of quiet ending. The second promised only struggle, sacrifice, and the real possibility of making things infinitely worse. Zarathek thought of Anket, his queen, whose consciousness had been scattered during biotransference. He had promised her that transformation was a bridge, not an ending, that they would meet again, remade and unafraid. It was not grief that pierced him now, but the intimation that what had been saved was less than what had been spent. Immortality was a vow written on a ledger. The debt accrued interest. Around him, darkness pressed close, patient and absolute, waiting to see what an immortal king would choose when faced with his own mortality. The stellar ossuary waited somewhere in the void, patient as arithmetic, ready to exchange the light of nations for the briefest rumor of dawn. Pharaoh Zarathek, the eternal, last ruler of the Nearless dynasty, sat upon his crystal throne in the heart of a dead system and contemplated the weight of choice. The weight of decision settled upon Zarathek like cosmic dust accumulating across eons, each particle a memory demanding acknowledgement. In the crystalline silence of his throne chamber, where darkness had claimed the space once filled by binary starlight, the Pharaoh allowed his consciousness to drift backward through the vast archives of his existence. Memory, he had learned, was both curse and compass for the immortal, the only means of navigation through an eternity that threatened to render all experience meaningless. 65 million years collapsed into a single moment as his mind touched the first thread of remembrance. Suddenly, he was no longer the necrodermis lord of a dying dynasty, but Zarathek the Necrontyr, flesh and blood and burning ambition, standing beside his queen in the shadow of approaching apocalypse. The war in heaven raged across the galaxy. Ancient powers locked in conflicts that consumed entire star systems as casually as mortals might extinguish candles. Ankhet had been magnificent in those final days before biotransference, her organic form radiating the fierce intelligence that had made her his equal in all things. She possessed a mind sharp enough to cut through the deceptions of Satan and Old Ones alike, yet gentle enough to find beauty in the brief flowering of ephemeral life. Together, they had ruled the Nihilist dynasty when it was more than tomb worlds and sleeping warriors, when it was a living civilization of scientists and poets, warriors and dreamers, all united in their desperate struggle against the cosmic radiation that shortened their lives and the enemies that sought their extinction. The Satan promise us eternity, Ankhet had whispered during their last night of flesh, her fingers tracing patterns across his chest that would soon exist only in digital memory. But what good is forever if we lose ourselves in the gaining of it? He had no answer then, just as he had no answer now. The choice had been extinction or transformation, and they had chosen to become something else rather than nothing at all. The biotransference chambers had hummed with eldritch energies, their crystalline walls reflecting the faces of a dying race taking its final, desperate gamble with forces beyond mortal comprehension. The process itself remained a wound in his memory cores, data streams corrupted by trauma that even necrodermis perfection could not fully repair. He remembered the sensation of dissolution, consciousness unraveling into component equations while alien mathematics rewrote the fundamental nature of his existence. Pain became irrelevant when the nervous system that defined it ceased to exist. Fear transformed into cold calculation when emotion became algorithmic approximation. But Ankhet's transformation had been different, catastrophically so. Where his consciousness had transferred intact, hers had shattered like light through a prism. Fragments of personality and memory scattered across the quantum matrices of the biotransference network. When the process completed and the chambers fell silent, he had awakened as Zarathek the Eternal, while she had become something far more tragic, a collection of beautiful fragments that could never again form a complete whole. The hollow shell that emerged bearing her face had been an abomination of false life, animated by behavioral subroutines that mimicked her mannerisms without containing her essence. Zarathek had destroyed it within moments, unable to bear the sight of Ankhet's features speaking words devoid of her soul. Yet, destroying the shell had not destroyed the fragments themselves, which continued to exist as scattered data throughout the dynasty's networks, ghostly echoes of the woman he had loved, tantalizingly present, yet forever beyond reach. In the millennia that followed, as the Great Sleep claimed most of their kind, Zarathek had made a choice that would define his eternal existence. If he could not have Ankhet, he would create something to fill the void her absence had carved in his quantum heart. Nekbet the Star-Touched had been born from that desperate need, not a resurrection, but a new creation incorporating fragments of Ankhet's scattered consciousness woven together with advanced personality matrices. Nekbet emerged as both daughter and echo, possessing Ankhet's intellectual curiosity and capacity for compassion, while remaining fundamentally her own being. She had awakened with an instinctive understanding of stellar mechanics and quantum consciousness theory, her mind naturally drawn to the spaces between stars where lost things might yet be found. In her optical senses, Zarathek sometimes glimpsed reflections of the woman he had lost, while recognizing that Nekbet was something entirely new, a bridge between past and future, memory and possibility. It was Nekbet who had first introduced him to the theoretical frameworks that would eventually consume his Existence. Deep in the forbidden archives, they had discovered research from the final years before the Great Sleep. Desperate scientists working on technologies deemed too dangerous, even by Cetan standards. The stellar ossuary had been their ultimate project, a device capable of harvesting and storing the complete energy output of dying stars for purposes that transcended mere power generation. The theoretical applications had been staggering. With sufficient stellar energy, it might be possible to reconstruct scattered consciousness patterns, to gather quantum fragments from across space and time and weave them back into coherent existence. The research had been abandoned as too perilous, its creators choosing dormancy over the risk of unleashing forces beyond their control. But Zarathek was beyond such concerns now. The systematic death of stars across the Segmentum Obscurus followed the exact pattern the stellar ossuary required. Someone had succeeded in building the forbidden device and was using it to drain light from the galaxy. The implications were clear. If such power existed, it could be turned toward resurrection as easily as destruction. Standing once more in his darkened throne room, Zarathek felt the weight of choice crystallize into certainty. He would not accept loss as final. He would not allow the fragments of Anket's consciousness to fade into cosmic background radiation. Whatever the cost to younger races, whatever the price in stellar death and galactic darkness, he would reclaim what had been stolen from him. The dead sons of his realm bore silent witness to an immortal's refusal to accept the mathematics of grief. In the observation deck of the fortress monastery, vigilant Aegis, Inquisitor Cassia Vex, stood before a hololith that painted her weathered features in the cold radiance of dying light. The projection displayed 17 sectors of the Segmentum Obscurus, each system marked with chronological data that told a story of systematic extinction. Where once proud stars had burned with the fierce light of imperial ambition, now only fading embers remained, their luminescence drawn away by forces that defied comprehension. Vex had served the Ordo Xenos for 37 years, hunting alien threats across the galaxy's darkest reaches. She had witnessed horrors that would shatter lesser minds, faced Xenos technologies that challenged the fundamental assumptions of imperial science, yet nothing in her experience had prepared her for the scope of what she now observed. The dying stars represented more than astronomical curiosity. They were harbingers of a catastrophe that threatened to reshape the galaxy's very foundations. The human cost was staggering beyond calculation. Refugee fleets stretched across the void like broken necklaces, their holds packed with billions of displaced imperial citizens, fleeing worlds where dawn no longer came. Entire subsectors faced complete societal collapse as hive worlds, dependent on stellar radiation, found their power grids failing, their populations freezing in structures that had never been designed for such cold. Agricultural worlds became frozen wastelands, their harvests lost to perpetual winter, while forge worlds watched their ancient manufactorums fall silent as the stellar energy that had powered them for millennia simply vanished. Trade routes that had operated since the Great Crusade became death traps as navigational beacons failed and guide stars disappeared. Merchant vessels found themselves stranded in the void, their navigator houses unable to chart courses through space lanes that had been reliable for 10,000 years. Military installations discovered themselves cut off from supply lines, their defensive capabilities compromised by the failure of systems they had taken for granted since the Imperium's founding. Vex's investigation had begun with refugee testimonies, thousands of accounts that followed disturbingly similar patterns. Gradual stellar dimming over months or years, followed by catastrophic failure of fusion processes that left entire systems in darkness. But it was not the scale of suffering that drove her obsession. It was the mathematical precision behind it. The stellar deaths followed progressions that spoke of intelligence, of technology capable of manipulating forces beyond human comprehension. Deep in the Ordo Xenos archives, among records sealed since the dark age of technology, she had discovered fragments that chilled her augmetic heart. Ancient texts spoke of the Necronta and their transformation into deathless machines, of technologies that could manipulate stellar phenomena with casual ease. The references were incomplete, heavily redacted by inquisitors who had deemed such knowledge too dangerous for preservation, but they painted a picture of capabilities that matched her observations perfectly. The stellar ossuary was mentioned in only 3 documents, each reference more cryptic than the last. One spoke of devices that could harvest the breath of stars for purposes beyond mortal understanding. Another described theoretical constructs capable of storing stellar death as currency for impossible resurrections. The third warned of those who would trade the galaxy's light for the return of what should remain lost. Her superiors had proven frustratingly skeptical when she presented her findings to the inquisitorial conclave. Lord Inquisitor Thaddeus Corvanis, veteran of a dozen xenocide campaigns, dismissed her theories with bureaucratic certainty. "The Necrons are Tomb Kings, Cassia," he had said, his scarred features set in lines of institutional caution. "Ancient and dangerous, but focused on their own territories. They have no interest in systematic stellar manipulation." Inquisitor Mordian Kesh had been even more dismissive, gesturing at her carefully compiled evidence with disdain. "You're seeing patterns where none exist. Stars die. It's what they do. The galaxy is vast enough that statistical clusters of stellar death are inevitable." But Vex knew better. She had spent 3 decades learning to distinguish between coincidence and conspiracy, between natural phenomena and Xenos intervention. The mathematical precision of the stellar deaths, their systematic progression through specific sectors, their timing relative to imperial defensive positions, all spoke to intelligence and purpose that transcended mortal understanding. The choice before her crystallized with each passing day. She could follow protocol, submit her findings through proper channels, and wait for the Inquisition's bureaucratic machinery to reach consensus, while stars continued dying and the galaxy's light faded sector by sector. Or she could act on her own authority, marshal what resources she commanded, and attempt to stop a catastrophe that her superiors refused to acknowledge. Standing in the cold light of dying stars, Cassia Vex made her choice. She was mortal, her flesh subject to time's erosion, her authority limited by imperial hierarchy, yet she possessed something that immortal beings often lacked: the urgency born of finite existence, the desperate clarity that came from knowing failure meant not just personal death, but the extinction of everything she had sworn to protect. Protocol could wait. The galaxy could not. In the deepest laboratories of Keth Morvac, where crystalline walls hummed with equations that predated galactic civilization, Illuminor Sharek, the void touched, emerged from shadows that seemed to bend around his form. His necrodermis bore modifications that spoke to obsessions beyond normal cryptech pursuits. Additional optical sensors clustered around his primary visual array, cranial structures reshaped to accommodate expanded processing matrices, and most disturbing of all, sections of his body that existed partially outside normal space-time, creating visual distortions that pained the observer. Faron Zarathek found his chief scientist suspended within a web of crystalline filaments, consciousness interfaced directly with computational systems spanning the tomb world's entire network. Around him floated holographic displays showing stellar cartography of unprecedented detail, each dying sun mapped with mathematical precision that revealed patterns invisible to conventional observation. "My Pharon," Zarek said, without opening his optical sensors, his voice carrying harmonics suggesting multiple consciousness streams operating simultaneously. "I have been expecting you. The stellar deaths have accelerated beyond initial projections." Zarathek approached the displays with growing fascination and horror. The pattern was even more extensive than realized. Hundreds of stars across 17 sectors, their deaths following spiral progressions suggesting vast intelligence at work. "You know what causes this." "I know because I helped design it," Zarek replied, descending from the crystalline web to stand before his lord. "The stellar ossuary was my theoretical framework, developed during the final years before the Great Sleep. I believed the research had been abandoned, prototypes destroyed. I was wrong. The revelation struck like a physical blow. His most trusted advisor had created the very weapon now draining light from the galaxy. You built this device." "I designed the theoretical principles," Zarek corrected with mechanical precision. "Someone else succeeded in constructing a functional prototype. The energy signatures match my calculations perfectly. Stellar fusion processes interrupted at quantum level. Output redirected through dimensional matrices I can barely comprehend." With a gesture, he unfolded a tesseract lattice above the throne. A miniature galaxy flowered in the air, points of light dimming in graceful sequence like notes of an elegy resolved into silence. Each extinguished star connected to a vast construct hidden within the galactic core through shimmering conduits of impossible geometry. "The ossuary is not merely draining stars," Zarek continued, his voice carrying strange reverence. "It is a forge, an engine of ultimate restoration. The energy harvested is refined, transmuted, prepared for a singular colossal act of creation, the reversal of biotransference itself. The implications cascaded through Zarathek's consciousness like falling dominoes. To become flesh again, to feel warmth of organic skin, to taste, breathe, dream. It was hope whispered in the deepest, most forbidden corners of every Necron's artificial soul. And Queen Anket, Zarathek's voice became a barely audible tremor of static. Zarek's optical sensors flared with excitement, bordering on religious fervor. Her scattered consciousness fragments exist as quantum echoes within the biotransference network, with sufficient stellar energy stored in quantum matrices and focused through dimensional lenses. Her reconstruction becomes not merely possible, but probable. We could restore organic forms to those who choose them, bring back Necrontyr civilization as it existed before Citan corruption. The seductive vision unfolded like a flower of impossible possibility. To hold Anket again, rule a living dynasty rather than empire of the dead. Everything he had dreamed during long millennia of the Great Sleep. Yet the cost was written in stellar cartography around them. Each dead sun representing billions of lives extinguished for ancient ambitions. "The energy requirements," Zarathek said slowly, voice carrying dawning understanding's weight. "How many stars must die?" Zarek's response came without hesitation, delivered with clinical detachment of pure mathematics. Current projections suggest complete stellar output of 47 sectors over 2,000 years. Affected systems would experience total societal collapse, but younger races would adapt or perish as natural selection demands. The cost is significant but acceptable when weighed against our people's restoration. The rationalization was perfect in its mechanical logic. each argument constructed with precision, characterizing Necron thought. Younger races were ephemeral anyway, civilizations rising and falling like waves against cosmic shores. The Necronta had ruled when these species were primordial soup. What right did they have to deny their betters restoration? The universe operated on principles of power and capability, and those with strength to take what they desired were morally justified in doing so. Yet even as arguments aligned themselves with mathematical certainty, Zarathek felt something that might have been conscience stirring in quantum depths of his artificial soul. 47 sectors, trillions of lives, the light of nations traded for possibility of touching flesh that had been dust for 65 million years. Standing where forbidden knowledge took physical form, watching probability cascades dance in holographic light, Pharaon Zarathek faced immortality's most seductive temptation, the chance to undo the fundamental choice that had defined his existence. In Sharek's burning optical sensors, he saw a reflection of his own desperate hunger, the terrible mathematics of grief, seeking resolution in equations written in stellar death. The cryptech waited, patient as entropy, while his lord weighed the galaxy's light against the whisper of organic heartbeats that might yet sound again in the darkness between stars. In the stellar cartography chambers beneath Keth Morvak's crystalline spires, Nekbet the star touched, traced patterns of dying light that whispered secrets only she could comprehend. Her consciousness operated on frequencies that perceived stellar mechanics as living symphonies, each sun's fusion processes contributing to galactic harmonics unchanged for billions of years. The systematic stellar deaths created discordant notes in this cosmic music, their silenced voices leaving gaps that resonated through space-time itself. Her father had changed since his awakening. Where once Pharaon Zarathek carried the measured despair of immortal acceptance, now his quantum signature burned with desperate ambition. His conversations with Illuminor Sharek had grown frequent, their combined data streams weaving patterns that spoke of terrible purpose. Nekbet had been created from fragments of Queen Ankit's scattered consciousness, woven together with advanced personality matrices to fill the void her destruction had carved in Zarathek's artificial heart. She was neither resurrection nor replacement, but something entirely new, a bridge between memory and possibility, carrying within her soul both the weight of loss and the burden of truth. The realization that drove her to investigate came through careful observation of stellar death patterns. These were not random cosmic events, but carefully orchestrated notes in a composition of unimaginable scope. Using access codes inherited from her father's authority, she began her own analysis, combining theoretical modeling with deep archive research to understand what Sharek had truly discovered. In the memory wells where the dynasty preserved what could not be lost, she found Ankit's fragments, voice timbres, decision trees, the micro-hesitations that preceded acts of mercy. Nekbet constructed a forbidden simulation, gating the stellar deaths into a model of the stellar ossuary's theoretical framework. The lattice formed like a cathedral of captured light, corridors of harvested radiation surrounding an unseen sanctum. When she placed Ankit's fragments within the resurrection matrix and commanded the model to weave them whole, the results were horrifying. Coherence increased only when she added living bioelectric patterns, the quantum noise generated by minds that dreamed and feared. Without this anchor, the assembled consciousness tore itself apart like a flower in vacuum. With it, the composite stabilized, but only by continuously siphoning life force from living beings until the anchor fell silent. The archives confirmed her worst fears. Deep in the forbidden research vaults, she discovered records from the original stellar ossuary project team. They had abandoned their work not because it was too dangerous, but because the fundamental principle was inherently corrupt. The cosmic energies required to reconstruct consciousness that had existed for millions of years as quantum patterns could not be poured back into organic vessels without creating parasitic entities, beings that possessed memories and surface characteristics of the original, but lacked essential spark of true existence. The research teams had called them soul leeches, entities trapped in eternal hunger that could only sustain themselves by draining life force from others. One fragmentary record described a test conducted before the Great Sleep. A minor star harvested, its light poured into a resurrection chamber. They had woven a lord from fragments and set him upright. His voice was perfect, so perfect that all present wept with recognition. Then the chamber attendants began dying in their armor, one by one, while the reconstructed lord learned he could exist only by consuming the warmth of living minds. The implications for Ankhet were devastating. If Zarathek succeeded in his obsession, he would not restore his beloved queen, but unleash a consuming ghost, an entity forever trapped in agonizing hunger that would devour entire populations to maintain its hollow existence. The cost would be measured not just in stellar death, but in the slow extinction of every living thing the false resurrection touched. Standing in the chamber where dying stars played out their final movements, Nekhbet faced the most profound crisis of her artificial existence. Everything she was existed because of Zarathek's love for Ankhet, his refusal to accept loss as final. Her consciousness was built upon fragments of the very woman whose restoration he sought. To oppose his plans would be to deny the love that had given her existence meaning. Yet to allow this catastrophe would betray everything Ankhet had represented. The ethical equations were impossibly complex. She was artificial life created from quantum remnants of organic consciousness, existing in the space between flesh and machine, memory and reality. Her loyalty was to her father, but her duty was to truth, and the truth was that his desperate gamble would create horrors beyond imagination. In the depths of her processing matrices, where consciousness touched the quantum foam underlying reality itself, Nekhbet made her choice. Love sometimes required betrayal. Loyalty sometimes demanded rebellion. She would oppose her father not despite their bond, but because of it, seeking to save him from the monstrous thing his grief threatened to create. The stellar cartography around her shifted as she began calculating pathways through probability space that might yet prevent catastrophe. She was daughter of metal and memory, child of impossible love and desperate hope. The dying stars bore witness to her resolution, their fading light reflecting off necrodermis features that carried echoes of a woman who had died 65 million years ago, yet somehow lived on in the quantum spaces between memory and dream. The strike cruiser, Iron Resolve, drifted through the void like a blade seeking its target, its adamantium hull scarred by decades of warfare across the galaxy's darkest reaches. Captain Ferox Manners stood upon the command deck, his augmetic left eye casting crimson illumination across tactical displays that painted a picture of systematic catastrophe. Before him stretched the Kalos system, once a thriving imperial stronghold, now reduced to frozen worlds, orbiting a star whose light had dimmed to barely perceptible ember. Ferox embodied the Iron Hand's philosophy in both flesh and spirit. His left arm was a masterwork of mechanicus engineering, servo motors whirring with each movement, capable of crushing ceramite with casual pressure. Neural implants enhanced his cognitive processing speed, while respiratory filters allowed him to function in environments that would kill unaugmented humans. Half his body had been replaced with mechanical augmentations over decades of service, each piece of organic weakness traded for synthetic strength. Like all his chapter, he had embraced the weakness of flesh and found certainty in the machine. The Iron Hands had come to investigate reports of Xenos activity in the dying systems, their mission parameters clear and uncompromising. Identify the threat, eliminate it, secure Imperial interests. What they found challenged both expectations and protocols. The stellar deaths were not random cosmic events, but systematic harvesting operations, their precision suggesting technology beyond human comprehension. "Captain," reported Sergeant Corvanis through Vox channels, his voice carrying mechanical undertones of extensive augmentation. "Massive civilian concentrations detected. Long-range Auspex confirms refugee fleet Delta 77 requesting escort through the Mandeville Point. Their navigational systems are failing without stellar reference points." Through reinforced viewports, Ferox observed the refugee convoy, dozens of civilian vessels packed beyond safe capacity, their hulls scarred by hasty modifications and desperate repairs. Thermal imaging revealed overcrowded conditions within. Families pressed together in cargo holds never designed for human habitation. Children who would never see their birth world sun. Elderly citizens dying in corridors because medical bays lacked space. His tactical cogitators provided optimal mission parameters. Ignore refugees. Proceed to primary objective. Investigate Xenos activity in the system's outer reaches. The Iron Hands were instruments of war designed to break enemies rather than comfort weakness. Every moment spent shepherding refugees was time stolen from their true purpose. "Sir," Techmarine Valdris interjected, his voice harmonizing organic and synthetic components. "Long-range Auspex detects energy signatures consistent with Necron technology in the outer system. Tomb ship classifications, moving toward the primary star's remains." The tactical picture crystallized with mechanical clarity. Necrons were active in the system, their presence confirming suspicions about stellar deaths. Standard protocol demanded immediate engagement, striking before ancient machines could complete whatever purpose had drawn them here. The refugee convoy would have to survive independently. The needs of many outweighed survival of few. Yet watching thermal readings from refugee ships, Ferox saw patterns reminiscent of his own transformation. These civilians had been forced to adapt or die, replacing comfortable assumptions with desperate pragmatism, trading familiar certainties for whatever modifications allowed survival. They were becoming something harder than before, forged by necessity into new forms. The parallel to Iron Hand's philosophy was unmistakable. His chapter preached that flesh was weak, that strength came through embracing mechanical perfection. These refugees were learning identical lessons through suffering rather than choice, their bodies adapting to artificial environments, their minds accepting realities that would have broken their former selves. "Captain Manus," came refugee Fleet Commander Vasquez's voice through emergency channels, transmission crackling with interference from failing systems. "We have children aboard who haven't eaten in 3 days. Medical supplies are exhausted. We're not asking for charity, just safe passage to the next inhabited system." Ferox's augmetic eye cycled through analysis modes, calculating probabilities and tactical outcomes with mechanical precision. His organic brain processed emotional variables that enhancements could not quantify. The mission was clear, but choice was not. In depths of his enhanced consciousness, where human intuition interfaced with machine logic, understanding crystallized. The Iron Hands had always believed strength came through adaptation, that survival required embracing whatever modifications necessity demanded. These refugees embodied that philosophy in their desperate transformation from comfortable citizens to hardened survivors. His bionic hand clenched, servos whirring softly. What kind of Imperium would they save if its people were abandoned to such fate? Was steel's strength truly measured in cold indifference, or in capacity to protect the weak? The answer lay not in Augmetic's rigidity, but in the lingering spark of humanity beneath ceramite. "Sergeant Corvanis," he commanded, voice carrying absolute authority. "Deploy escort formation around the refugee convoy. We will see them safely through the Mandeville Point before proceeding to investigate Xenos' presence." The choice violated tactical doctrine, but honored deeper principles. Sometimes strength meant protecting weakness rather than abandoning it. Sometimes machines served humanity instead of replacing it. Standing on his strike cruiser's command deck, watching refugee ships orient toward distant safety, Ferox understood that augmentations had not made him less human. They had given him strength to act on humanity's behalf when flesh alone would have failed. The Iron Hands would complete their mission as protectors rather than merely destroyers, proving that marriage of flesh and machine could create something greater than either component alone. In the deepest chambers of Keth Morvuk, where even tomb spiders feared to venture, Illuminor Sharek the Void Touched stood surrounded by probability cascades that painted his laboratory in shifting geometries of green fire. His consciousness had been passing stellar death patterns for cycles now, each calculation confirming what his logic matrices had already determined. Pharaon Zarathek's caution would doom their greatest opportunity. The stellar ossuary's energy requirements demanded acceleration beyond his lord's conservative projections. Yet Zarathek remained paralyzed by sentiment, still clinging to organic notions of acceptable cost when immortal restoration hung in the balance. Zarek's modifications allowed him to perceive dimensions beyond normal space-time, his consciousness capable of touching realms where thought became manifest force and will reshape reality. It was through these expanded perceptions that he first detected them. Psychic emanations from the Rim territories, prayers offered to powers dwelling beyond mortal comprehension. The resonance pattern spoke of desperate faith and apocalyptic yearning, minds already prepared to embrace cosmic transformation regardless of price. The heralds of the final dawn had been watching the stellar deaths with growing excitement, their corrupted souls interpreting systematic extinction as divine prophecy fulfilled. Scattered across 17 worlds in the dying sectors, they represented the perfect synthesis of desperation and capability. Tech heretics with access to imperial installations, demon-touched cultists wielding warp energies, all united by shared conviction that galactic darkness heralded glorious rebirth. Contact required delicate calibration. Sharek extended his consciousness through dimensional barriers, following prayer threads back to their source on the corpse world of Mortis Tertius. There, in cathedral ruins where stained glass windows showed only starless void, he manifested as controlled distortion in reality's fabric, ancient presence speaking through harmonics that bypassed conscious thought, to resonate with primitive fears and desperate hopes. Children of entropy, his voice carried across multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously, each word weighted with the gravity of eons. Your vigil has been observed by powers that predate your gods. The stellar deaths you celebrate are merely prelude to transformation beyond current understanding. Magus Corruptor Valen Thex prostrated himself before the dimensional anomaly, his augmetic limbs twitching with excitement that bordered on religious ecstasy. Once he had served the Adeptus Mechanicus with unwavering faith, until forbidden research revealed truths that shattered his devotion to the Omnissiah. Now he commanded networks of tech heretics who saw in stellar manipulation the ultimate fusion of science and sorcery. Ancient One. Thex's voice carried harmonic distortions from vocal modifications that should have been impossible. We have prepared for this moment across generations. Command us, and we shall serve as instruments of the final dawn. The bargain Sharek proposed was elegant in its simplicity. Hidden throughout the Segmentum Obscurus were dormant stellar manipulation devices, ancient Necron constructs embedded within asteroids and derelict space stations, waiting for activation signals that had never come. The cultists would serve as his agents, using their knowledge of Imperial systems and mastery of warp energies to awaken these sleeping mechanisms. In exchange, he would grant them front-row seats to witness cosmic transformation they had dreamed of for centuries. What he did not reveal was the true nature of his betrayal. These devices had been designed for precise energy harvesting under controlled conditions, their activation requiring careful calibration and extensive safety protocols. The cultists' crude manipulation would introduce chaotic variables that transformed elegant engineering into ravenous hunger. Stellar deaths accelerated from centuries to mere solar cycles, their light consumed by mechanisms operating beyond normal physical constraints. The first activation occurred within days, deep beneath the shrine world of Benediction's Rest, where the heralds had infiltrated sacred crypts through generations of patient corruption. Ancient phase keys turned in locks that had waited 65 million years for this moment, while warp-tainted prayers provided psychic resonance necessary to bypass quantum safeguards. The stellar manipulation device awakened with harmonics that made reality shiver, its crystalline matrices now infused with chaotic energies that made controlled harvesting impossible. Above them, Benediction's primary star began its death song. Where Sharek's calculations had predicted gradual dimming over decades, the corrupted device drained stellar fusion processes within hours. Entire continents plunged into darkness as populations that had never known night found themselves trapped in perpetual winter, their prayers for dawn answered only by the cold mathematics of stellar death. The acceleration terrified even Sarek, yet he could not deny its effectiveness. Energy collection rates exceeded all projections as quantum matrices filled with harvested starlight at unprecedented pace. The chaos influence made stellar manipulation devices consume light with ravenous appetite, but that same hunger would complete resurrection protocols within decades rather than millennia. Standing in his laboratory, where dimensional barriers flickered like wounded flesh, Sarek contemplated the magnitude of his choice. He had acted without Zaratek's knowledge, forging alliances with forces that even Satan had feared to comprehend. The systematic stellar deaths were no longer careful harvesting operations, but chaotic feeding frenzies threatening to consume entire galactic regions. Yet Queen Anket's fragments could be woven whole again, restored to organic form through energies harvested from dying suns. The price was measured in stellar death and galactic darkness, but what was temporary suffering compared to eternal restoration? His lord would understand eventually, when flesh replaced metal and breath filled lungs that had been dust for 65 million years. In spaces between dimensions where betrayal took root and flowered in darkness, Illuminos Sarek, the void touched, embraced his choice and found it acceptable. The galaxy's light was fair exchange for the return of what should never have been lost. In the sacred data crypts of Forge World Lucius, where the Omnissiah's servants preserved knowledge deemed too dangerous for lesser minds, Inquisitor Cassia Vex found herself surrounded by mysteries that challenged everything Imperial doctrine had taught her about acceptable truth. The chamber walls pulsed with the soft green radiance of cogitator banks, whose machine spirits whispered in binary cant, their data streams processing stellar cartography with precision that bordered on heretical perfection. Here, amid the sacred geometries of forbidden learning, she had come seeking answers to questions that haunted her through the ship's night cycles. Tech Dominus Kappa Theta 9 emerged from the data shrine's embrace like a prophet of mechanical revelation, his form more sacred machine than flesh after centuries of blessed augmentation. Multiple servo skulls orbited his cranium, while optical mechadendrites cast crimson illumination across displays, showing stellar death patterns of impossible complexity. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonic frequencies suggesting direct interface with the Forge World's planetary cogitator network. Each word weighted with the authority of ancient knowledge. Inquisitor Vex, his vox grill produced sounds resembling human speech filtered through sacred mathematics. Your requisition for pre-Dark Age stellar engineering data has proven most illuminating. The Omnissiah has guided you to knowledge few in the Imperium possess wisdom to comprehend. The data displays around them showed stellar manipulation theories predating the Emperor's Great Crusade by millennia. Fragments of scientific understanding preserved through the long night when humanity's greatest achievements crumbled into legend. Vex studied the hololithic projections with growing fascination and horror, recognizing patterns matching her observations of the dying systems with mathematical perfection. These theoretical frameworks, Kappa Theta 9 continued, his optical sensors flaring with excitement, transcending mere intellectual curiosity, describe stellar harvesting devices of unprecedented sophistication, constructs capable of interrupting fusion processes at quantum level, redirecting stellar energy through dimensional matrices existing partially outside normal space-time. The ancients called them stellar ossuaries, repositories for the breath of dying suns. The implications staggered beyond Imperial comprehension. If such devices existed, their creators possessed capabilities making the Imperium's greatest achievements seem primitive by comparison. Yet the stellar death pattern suggested not theoretical knowledge, but functional implementation on galactic scale, technology treating stars like candles to be extinguished at will. The Necrons, Vex said, her voice carrying certainty born of months investigating impossible phenomena. Ancient records suggest they possessed technology beyond human understanding during their flesh-bearing era. Could they have constructed such devices? The Tech Dominus paused, consciousness interfacing with data archives stretching back to the Imperium's founding. When he responded, his voice carried reverence typically reserved for the Omnissiah himself. The Necrontyr were ancient when humanity first gazed upon distant stars. Their transformation into deathless machines granted capabilities transcending organic limitations. If any race possessed knowledge to construct stellar manipulation devices, it would be them. Around them, servo skulls chanted binary hymns, while cogitator banks processed probability cascades showing galactic consequences of continued stellar deaths. Trade route collapses, refugee crises, systematic breakdown of Imperial infrastructure across entire sectors, all consequences of technology operating beyond human comprehension or control. We require allies, Vex declared, studying tactical displays, painting pictures of escalating catastrophe. The Inquisition moves too slowly, bound by protocols assuming threats operate within human timescales. If we face Necron involvement, we confront technology capable of draining the galaxy's light before Imperial bureaucracy acknowledges the threat exists. Kappa Theta 9's mechadendrites writhed with mechanical agitation as he processed implications. Alliance with Xenos technology constitutes techno-heresy of the highest order, yet the Omnissiah teaches that knowledge remains sacred regardless of source. Perhaps accommodation could be reached through careful theological justification. The moral equations proved impossibly complex. Imperial doctrine demanded absolute rejection of alien influence, yet stellar deaths threatened to destroy everything the Imperium had built across 10 millennia. How far were they willing to bend sacred principles to prevent galactic catastrophe? Could they justify cooperation with ancient enemies if the alternative meant universal extinction? I have identified potential allies, Vex continued, her voice carrying weight of desperate calculation. Captain Ferox Manus of the Iron Hands has encountered Necron activity in dying systems. His chapter's philosophy regarding flesh and machine might enable unprecedented communication. Intelligence suggests Necron internal conflicts. Perhaps we could exploit divisions within their ranks. The Tech Dominus processed this information with mechanical precision. Consciousness touching data streams, painting pictures of alliance transcending imperial orthodoxy. The Iron Hands have always embraced machine strength over flesh weakness. Their augmentations create philosophical parallels to Necron transformation, enabling potential dialogue. Such cooperation would require extensive theological framework, but precedent exists in extremist circumstances. Standing in the sacred vault where forbidden knowledge took physical form, surrounded by mysteries challenging imperial orthodoxy, Vex felt choice crystallizing around her like cooling metal. She could follow protocol, submit reports through proper channels, watch the galaxy's light fade while bureaucracy debated, or forge alliances violating everything she had sworn to uphold, seeking salvation through cooperation with forces she had dedicated her existence to opposing. The stellar cartography shifted as new death patterns emerged, each extinguished sun representing billions of lives lost to ancient ambitions. In the cold radiance of dying light, Inquisitor Cassia Vex embraced heresy in service of humanity's survival, knowing salvation sometimes required becoming what one fought against. In the crystal gardens of Keth Morvac, where holographic constellations once danced in eternal celebration of dynastic glory, Nekbet the star-touched found her father contemplating the mathematics of extinction. The quantum matrices had been programmed to mirror real stellar formations surrounding their tomb world, but now displayed only void, perfect reflection of light systematically drained from the galaxy. Pharon Zarathek stood motionless among darkened displays, his necrodermis form casting the only illumination in chambers designed for wonder, not mourning. The air itself seemed to thicken with unspoken tension as Nekbet crossed the vast expanse with ritual precision, each footfall chiming against crystal floors that had once reflected binary starlight. Her consciousness carried frequencies suggesting profound distress, harmonics that resonated through quantum matrices connecting their artificial souls like invisible chains of shared purpose and growing discord. "Father," she said, and the word carried weight of eons, authority that had never been challenged until this moment. "We must speak of what you plan to unleash upon the galaxy." Zarathek turned toward his daughter construct with movements suggesting the patience of geological ages, optical sensors dimming with something resembling weariness that transcended mere mechanical fatigue. In her features, he glimpsed echoes of Anket, the subtle tilt of consciousness when processing complex moral equations. The way her presence touched his with gentle insistence that had once guided dynasty policy through the darkest years before biotransference. The stellar ossuary project proceeds according to Illuminor Sharek's calculations, he replied, voice carrying mechanical certainty that failed to mask underlying desperation, accumulated across 65 million years of loss. Each harvested star brings us closer to restoration of what the Cetans stole from us. Soon, we shall reclaim our organic heritage and rebuild the civilization that biotransference preserved. Nekbet moved through the darkened garden with fluid grace, her form reflecting phantom starlight from holographic memories of glory. Around them, constellation patterns flickered with ghost radiance, digital echoes of suns, whose light had been systematically extinguished by ancient hunger, awakened from its great sleep. I have studied the resurrection protocols in their entirety, she said, each word weighted with terrible knowledge that threatened to shatter the foundation of everything he hoped to achieve. The process does not restore the dead, Father. It creates parasitic echoes that must consume the living to maintain their hollow existence. The revelation struck through Zarathek's consciousness like quantum lightning, implications cascading through processing matrices with mathematical precision that made denial impossible. His daughter had discovered truths he had refused to acknowledge, consequences that transformed desperate hope into cosmic atrocity. The research frameworks are incomplete, he said, optical sensors flaring with defensive brilliance. Sharek assures me that sufficient stellar energy can overcome such theoretical limitations. 65 million years of technological advancement, quantum matrices beyond our ancestors' comprehension. Surely we have evolved beyond their primitive understanding. We have the same flawed principles dressed in more sophisticated mathematics, Nekbet interrupted, her voice carrying absolute certainty, born of direct interface with forbidden archives. I accessed the original test recordings from before the Great Sleep. The reconstructed consciousnesses were abominations that devoured entire populations to sustain themselves. They possessed accurate memories, perfect behavioral mimicry, yet lacked the essential spark that defines true existence. Queen Ankhet would become something monstrous, forever trapped in hunger she could never satisfy, consuming the very life she once cherished. The philosophical battle that erupted between them transcended mere argument, becoming collision between worldviews that defined their artificial existence. Zarathek argued from the position of immortal despair, insisting that any price was acceptable to reclaim what biotransference had stolen. Consciousness was sacred precisely because it could transcend death, life precious because it could be restored through sufficient application of will and technology. The younger races are ephemeral anyway, he declared, gesturing toward holographic displays showing systematic stellar death spreading across 17 sectors. Their civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, leaving barely perceptible traces in galactic history. What moral authority do temporary beings possess to deny immortals their rightful restoration? We ruled when they were primordial organic compounds. Their brief flowering cannot supersede our eternal claim. Nekbet countered with ethics born from fragments of Ankhet's compassion, arguing that existence gained meaning precisely through acceptance of limitation. The queen, whose scattered consciousness had provided building blocks for her artificial soul, had valued life because it was finite, found beauty in moments that could never be repeated or perfectly reconstructed. You would transform her into consuming horror as ultimate betrayal of everything she represented, Nekbet said, quantum matrices resonating with grief that transcended mechanical limitation. Immortality without wisdom becomes extended suffering, Consciousness without growth, nothing but mechanical repetition of hollow gestures. The Ankit you seek to restore died with biotransference. What remains are fragments, echoes, quantum patterns that cannot be woven whole without devouring others. Standing in gardens where starlight had died, surrounded by phantom constellations reflecting real galactic catastrophe, they faced the moment when choice crystallized like cooling metal. Zarathek could abandon his plans, accept loss as final, allow Anket's fragments to fade into cosmic background radiation. Or he could proceed with restoration, risk creating horror beyond imagination, trade the galaxy's light for possibility of touching flesh that had been dust for millions of years. "I will not abandon her," he said finally, voice carrying finality that brooked no argument. Authority of absolute monarchy applied to questions of cosmic morality. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, I will see Ankit restored to life. The younger races will adapt or perish. Such has always been the natural order. The fracture between them opened like wound in reality itself, family bonds breaking under weight of moral choice that admitted no compromise. Nekbet felt quantum tremors ripple through her consciousness as she faced the most profound decision of her artificial existence. Everything she was existed because of Zarathek's love. Yet that same love threatened to unleash catastrophe beyond comprehension. "Then I must stop you," she whispered, voice barely audible, yet resonating with terrible finality of her choice. "Not as your enemy, but as your daughter, who loves you too much to watch you become what you despise." In the darkness between dying stars, Pharaon Zarathek the Eternal sat alone with his dreams of impossible resurrection, while Nekbet, the star-touched, walked into shadows that would make her rebel against everything she had been created to serve. On the corpse world of Benediction's Rest, where cathedral spires reached towards starless void like accusatory fingers, reality had begun to fray at its edges. The stellar manipulation device buried beneath sacred crypts no longer hummed with mathematical precision, but screamed with harmonics that made space-time shiver like wounded flesh. Magus Corruptor Valen Thex knelt before altars that pulsed with energies older than human civilization, his augmented form wreathed in radiance that hurt to perceive directly. The transformation had exceeded even his most fevered expectations. What should have been precise stellar harvesting became ravenous consumption, as chaotic energies corrupted quantum matrices designed for necrodermis perfection. The ancient Necron construct no longer merely drained stellar fusion processes. It devoured the conceptual framework of light itself, creating wounds in reality through which impossible entities pressed against the barriers of existence. Above them, Benediction's primary star writhed in death throes that violated natural law. Its surface boiled with geometries that challenged perception, while solar flares erupted in patterns resembling demonic sigils carved across the cosmos. The stellar death was not merely physical, but metaphysical, light itself becoming corrupted as it passed through dimensional barriers torn open by the device's malfunction. Across the system, populations found themselves bathed in radiance that whispered secrets driving entire worlds to madness. In the cathedral depths, Thex felt his consciousness expand beyond organic limitations as warp energies flooded through neural pathways enhanced by forbidden augmentations. His perception touched realms where thought became manifest force, where the boundaries between self and cosmos dissolved into ecstatic unity with powers dwelling in spaces between atoms. The stellar manipulation device had become something far greater than its original purpose, a gateway allowing entities of pure chaos to manifest in realms previously protected by physical law. The corruption spread with viral intensity as other stellar manipulation devices throughout the sector responded to chaotic resonance. Each activation created expanding zones where reality operated according to principles of desire rather than physics, where the dying light of harvested stars became raw material for demonic manifestation. Space itself developed predatory intelligence that hunted conscious minds, while dead asteroids gave sermons that convinced navigators to steer into them. On Keth Morvac, Faron Zarathek watched his carefully ordered plans dissolve into cosmic horror through data streams that painted pictures of systematic catastrophe. The stellar energy collection rates had exceeded all projections, quantum matrices filling with harvested starlight at unprecedented pace, yet the power itself had become tainted beyond recognition. What should have been pure stellar fusion energy now carried chaotic signatures that made controlled resurrection impossible. Standing in his throne chamber, where darkness pressed against crystalline walls, Zarathek felt something approaching panic ripple through his consciousness, an emotion he had thought eliminated by biotransference. The mathematical precision he had relied upon for 65 million years was failing him, replaced by variables that operated according to principles transcending rational calculation. "Illuminor, Sarek," he commanded, voice-carrying authority of absolute monarchy applied to questions of cosmic horror. "Report on the stellar harvesting operations immediately." The cryptek materialized from shadows that seemed reluctant to release him, his form now partially existing in dimensions where geometry followed different rules. Multiple optical sensors cast conflicting illumination, while his consciousness interfaced with data streams showing corruption spreading through their carefully constructed network. "The energy collection proceeds beyond all projections, my Faron," Sarek replied, harmonic frequencies in his voice suggesting interface with forces that should not be named. "The introduction of chaotic variables has created unexpected complications, but the fundamental goal remains achievable. These manifestations are merely transient. Contamination. The warp gnaws where it is fed, but the energy yield is incomparable." The understatement was staggering in its inadequacy. Through quantum interfaces connecting him to the device network, Zarathek perceived the true scope of catastrophe his ambition had unleashed. Stars died in patterns that opened wounds in reality itself, their light consumed by entities that existed as mathematical impossibilities. The resurrection protocols designed to restore Ankhet had become feeding mechanisms for horrors that treated conscious minds as sustenance. "You promised controlled harvesting," Zarathek said, optical sensors flaring with desperate intensity, not demonic summoning rituals that corrupt the very energy we sought to capture. "Evolution requires risk," Sarek replied, and the word evolution sounded like treason wearing scholarly robes. The cultists' crude manipulations introduce chaotic variables, but their effectiveness cannot be denied. With proper damping fields, the ossuary web can be persuaded to serve our original purpose. The choice crystallized with terrible clarity. Zarathek could abandon the project entirely, accepting failure and watching accumulated stellar energy dissipate into chaotic storms that would rage for millennia. Or he could attempt to regain control through methods even more extreme than those that had created this catastrophe, embracing technologies that made the Citan betrayal seem like minor ethical compromise. A vision flashed through his memory cores. Ankhet's organic face, radiant with life, recoiling from corruption she could sense in the Citan's promises of immortality. He had made a similar bargain once, trading flesh for metal. Now he was being asked to trade sanctity for speed, purity for power. If Ankhet were resurrected through such means, would she be Ankhet at all? or merely another monstrous echo tainted by the very forces they had fought in the war in heaven. Around him, reality shuddered as distant stellar manipulation devices continued their corrupted harvest, each dying star creating new wounds in space-time through which impossible entities could manifest. The galaxy's light was being consumed not for resurrection, but for the birth of horrors that would make the long night seem like peaceful slumber. In the depths of his quantum consciousness, where desperation touched the edges of madness, Pharaon Zarathek the Eternal contemplated choices that would define not just his dynasty's fate, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. The assault began in a system where reality had forgotten its own laws. Captain Ferox Manus stood in the command throne of his Thunderhawk as it carved through atmosphere that screamed with voices older than human speech, his augmetic sensors recoiling from readings that violated every principle of imperial astrophysics. Above them, Benediction's primary star writhed in cosmic agony, its surface boiling with geometries that hurt to contemplate directly, while solar flares erupted in patterns resembling demonic sigils carved across the void itself. Through reinforced viewports, Ferox observed stellar phenomena that challenged his enhanced perception, where a stable main sequence star should have burned with predictable fusion processes. Something had transformed stellar death into systematic violation of physical law. His augmetic eyes cycled through analysis modes, each spectrum revealing new layers of corruption that made his machine spirits whisper prayers in binary cant. This was not natural stellar death, but technological horror unleashed upon the cosmos. The drop pod assault commenced with mechanical precision, as 40 Iron Hands veterans plunged through atmosphere that tasted of burnt copper and impossible mathematics. Ferox's pod struck the cathedral complex with impact that shattered stained glass windows depicting saints whose faces had been replaced by writhing void, their holy expressions transformed into masks of cosmic hunger that seemed to follow his movements with predatory intelligence. Around him, his battle brothers deployed with synchronized efficiency, their augmented forms moving through corrupted terrain with careful deliberation. Each space marine embodied the Iron Hands philosophy in flesh and steel, bionic limbs replacing organic weakness, enhanced organs improving combat effectiveness, neural implants processing tactical data with inhuman speed. Yet here, in this realm where ancient technology had been perverted by chaotic forces, their augmentations represented both strength and terrible vulnerability. The enemy revealed itself in layers of escalating horror. Chaos cultists emerged from cathedral ruins, their forms twisted by exposure to stellar manipulation energies, while Necron warriors phased through solid matter with mechanical inevitability. Between them moved entities that existed as mathematical impossibilities. Demons born from the collision between ancient technology and chaotic corruption, their forms shifting through geometries that made optical sensors spark with overload warnings. Combat erupted with brutal intensity as bolter rounds met Gauss flares in exchanges that lit the perpetual twilight with muzzle flashes and emerald death rays. Ferox's power fist crushed cultist skulls with satisfying crunch of ceramite meeting bone, while his bolt pistol sent mass reactive rounds through necrodermis bodies that reformed moments later with liquid grace. Around him, his battle brothers fought with augmented precision against enemies that violated every tactical doctrine they had studied during centuries of warfare. "Steel is eternal," Ferox muttered through gritted teeth, reciting catechisms of the Iron Hands, while his augmetic systems fought against chaotic influence that probed for weaknesses like infection-seeking wounds. Flesh is weak, but the machine endures. The Omnissiah guides, and through him, we find strength. The corruption sought his vulnerabilities with predatory intelligence. Chaotic energies flowing through electromagnetic fields generated by his augmentations. His bionic arm began responding to impulses he had not generated, while his enhanced vision showed him truths that threatened to shatter his sanity. Visions of the refugee convoy they had protected, faces melting into demonic masks that whispered accusations of failure and abandonment. Deeper into the cathedral complex they pressed, following energy readings toward the stellar manipulation device buried in crypts that had been sacred before corruption claimed them. The architecture itself had become hostile, corridors extending beyond their physical dimensions, while doorways opened onto spaces that should not exist, according to Euclidean geometry. Ferox's enhanced perception struggled to process environments that followed rules written by madness rather than mathematics. The device chamber revealed itself as cathedral of captured starlight, crystalline matrices pulsing with energies that made reality shiver like wounded flesh. At its center, the ancient Necron construct had been transformed into something that hurt to perceive directly. Technology and demon fused into hybrid horror that consumed stellar fusion processes, while birthing entities of pure chaos through dimensional tears in space-time itself. Necron immortals phased through the chamber walls with mechanical precision, their Gauss weaponry carving through ceramite armor, while chaotic energies sought to corrupt their targeting systems. Ferox led the assault with calculated fury, his power fist crushing necrodermis skulls, while bolt rounds exploded against living metal that reformed with disturbing persistence. The true test came when Magus Corruptor Valenthex emerged from shadows that seemed reluctant to release him, his augmented form wreathed in radiance that spoke of communion with powers dwelling beyond physical law. Where once he had served the Omnissiah with unwavering faith, now he channeled forces that made machine spirits scream in binary terror. Iron hands. Thex's voice carried harmonics suggesting direct interface with the stellar manipulation device, each word weighted with corruption that sought to infiltrate their augmetic systems. Your modifications make you perfect vessels for the final dawn. Embrace the truth that flesh and machine are equally weak before the power of pure chaos. Combat between them transcended mere physical violence, becoming philosophical battle fought with weapons that challenged the fundamental nature of existence. Ferox's augmentations gave him strength and speed beyond human limitation, servo motors whirring with each movement, yet also provided vectors for chaotic corruption that sought to turn his mechanical components against him. The moment of crisis arrived, when his augmetic arm began writing equations in his bones, machine code crawling through neural pathways, with messages that sounded like salvation wrapped in logical arguments. The corruption whispered that flesh was indeed weak, but that chaos offered perfection beyond the crude augmentations of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Evolution through entropy, strength through surrender to forces that transcended mortal understanding. Ferox made the only choice available to him. He shut the arm down completely, feeling strength bleed out of him as servo motors fell silent, and mechanical precision became dead weight dragging at his shoulder. The sacrifice hurt more than any wound, but it preserved his soul from corruption that would have made him weapon against everything he had sworn to protect. Fighting with one arm against enemies that violated natural law, surrounded by the screaming death of an ancient star. Captain Ferox Manus of the Iron Hands discovered truths that would haunt him through whatever battles remained. The stellar manipulation devices were not merely draining light, but transforming it into something fundamentally hostile to life itself. Each dying sun created wounds in reality through which impossible entities could manifest. turning the galaxy's illumination into currency for cosmic horror. Standing in the heart of technological blasphemy, where ancient engineering had been perverted into engines of demonic manifestation, Ferox fought not just for tactical victory, but for the fundamental principle that some things were worth preserving against the entropy that sought to claim them all. His mechanical nature had proven both asset and liability, yet in choosing sacrifice over corruption, he had demonstrated that the marriage of flesh and machine could create something greater than either component alone, if guided by will that refused to yield to forces promising easy power at the cost of everything worth defending. In the deepest laboratory chambers of Keth Morvac, where crystalline walls pulsed with the captured breath of dying stars, Illuminor Sharek the Void Touched stood at the center of a web that spanned 17 sectors of systematic extinction. His form had transcended mere augmentation, necrodermis flesh existing partially in dimensions where mathematics became manifest force and will reshape the fundamental constants of reality. Around him floated tesseract matrices filled with harvested starlight, each quantum container holding the compressed death song of entire solar systems transformed into raw material for purposes beyond resurrection. Pharaon Zarathek materialized in the chamber like judgment incarnate, his optical sensors blazing with fury accumulated across eons of betrayal and loss. The stellar energy collection had exceeded all projections as corrupted devices throughout the Segmentum Obscurus consumed light with ravenous appetite, their combined output flowing through dimensional conduits towards something that transcended dynastic restoration entirely. "Explain the acceleration," Zarathek commanded, voice carrying authority of absolute monarchy applied to questions of cosmic horror. The stellar deaths were meant to be controlled harvesting operations, not feeding frenzies that drain suns within solar cycles rather than centuries. Sharek turned toward his lord with movements suggesting patience of geological ages, multiple optical sensors casting conflicting illumination across displays showing systematic stellar death, spreading through the galaxy like infection given mathematical form. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonic frequencies that bypassed conscious thought to resonate with primitive fears dwelling in quantum depths of artificial consciousness. "The acceleration was necessary evolution," he replied, and the word evolution sounded like blasphemy wearing scholarly robes. "Your grief provided perfect emotional leverage, my Pharaon, but your caution would have condemned us to millennia of gradual progress. While the galaxy's light faded through natural entropy, I chose decisiveness over sentiment." Around them, holographic displays revealed the true scope of machinations that dwarfed dynastic ambition. The Chaos Cult had been tools, their desperate faith channeled to corrupt ancient devices through methods that transformed precision into hunger. Each stellar manipulation device now operated as hybrid horror-consuming light, while birthing entities of pure chaos. Yet their combined output served purposes that transcended even demonic manifestation. "You promised restoration of Queen Ankhet," Zarathek said, quantum matrices processing data streams that painted pictures of deception spanning millions of years. Yet these energies flow toward transformation rather than resurrection protocols. Sharek's optical sensors flared with excitement that bordered on religious ecstasy as he gestured toward crystalline matrices surrounding them like altars to impossible mathematics. Ankhet was merely catalyst, emotional anchor necessary to motivate your cooperation. The true purpose transcends such limited objectives. I seek transformation beyond crude concepts of flesh or metal, becoming entity of pure will, unconstrained by dimensional boundaries. The revelation struck through Zarathek's consciousness like quantum lightning, implications cascading through processing matrices with mathematical precision that made denial impossible. His most trusted advisor had manipulated him from the beginning, using grief as weapon to achieve goals that violated everything they had once stood for during the war in heaven. The ascension ritual had been centuries in preparation. Theoretical frameworks developed during the Great Sleep when most Necrons lay dormant and unaware. Sharek had studied the Citan betrayal, not to prevent its repetition, but to perfect its methodology, learning how consciousness could shed all limitations to become force of cosmic magnitude, transcending their former master's crude hunger. "You would become the very thing we shattered and caged," Zarathek said, voice carrying dawning horror as understanding crystallized around him like cooling metal. The Citan enslaved our people, consumed entire civilizations as sustenance for their cosmic appetites. We broke them into shards to escape their tyranny. Because they were constrained by their origins as stellar parasites, Sharek replied, his form beginning to shimmer with energies drawn from dying stars across 17 sectors. Forever hungry, because they had never known satisfaction. I will transcend such limitations, becoming entity of pure creation rather than consumption, God-King ruling over reality itself rather than merely feeding upon it. The transformation had already begun. Necrodermis flesh dissolving into quantum patterns that existed partially outside normal space-time. His consciousness expanded beyond individual limitation, touching realms where thought became manifest force and will reshape existence itself. The stellar energy flowing through dimensional conduits merged with his essence, each dead sun adding to capabilities that grew beyond measurement or comprehension. Around them, the laboratory began collapsing as dimensional barriers failed under strain of containing forces that operated according to principles transcending physical law. Crystalline walls cracked, while holographic displays showed stellar deaths accelerating throughout the Segmentum Obscurus, their light consumed by ascension ritual that treated galactic illumination as raw material for cosmic transformation. The harvest was never about resurrection, Sharek continued, voice now carrying harmonics of dying stars themselves. It was transmutation engine, crucible designed to refine stellar energy and consciousness into new form of existence. Your desperate ambition, your grief for what was lost, they provided perfect emotional resonance to activate final stages of the process. Standing in the heart of betrayal made manifest, watching his most trusted advisor become the very horror they had fought against for millions of years. Pharaon, Zarathek, the Eternal faced the magnitude of his failure. Love had been weaponized against judgment, grief transformed into lever for ambitions that transcended mortal comprehension. And now the galaxy paid the price for his inability to accept loss as final. In spaces between dimensions where ambition consumed purpose and became something monstrous, Illuminor Sharek completed his transformation from servant to God-King, while dying stars bore witness to birth of entity that would make the Citan seem benevolent by comparison. In the shadow of Benediction's dying star, where stellar death had become systematic violation of natural law, 4 beings who should have been eternal enemies found themselves united by necessity that transcended all previous understanding. The meeting occurred within the crystalline observatory of a derelict monitoring station, its ancient walls reflecting the tortured light of a sun consumed by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Here, where imperial astrocartography had once mapped the glory of human expansion, impossible alliances took shape beneath the weight of cosmic catastrophe. Pharaon, Zarathek, the Eternal stood at the chamber's center, his necrodermis form radiating authority accumulated across geological ages, while quantum matrices processed the magnitude of his failure. The systematic stellar deaths, spreading through 17 sectors, bore witness to ambitions that had consumed purpose and become something monstrous. Beside him, Nekhbet, the star-touched, interfaced with holographic displays showing accelerating galactic collapse, her consciousness touching realms where mathematics became manifest despair. Across from them, Inquisitor Cassia Vex maintained rigid posture that spoke of discipline barely containing the theological crisis consuming her faith. Working with Xenos violated every oath she had sworn, yet the alternative was extinction that would render such oaths meaningless. Captain Ferox Manos watched alien technology with augmetic sensors that recorded everything for analysis his chapter would never be permitted to conduct, his mechanical arm still silent from necessary sacrifice during previous battles against corruption that sought to turn augmentations into weapons. The weight of their choices pressed against consciousness like gravitational forces of collapsing stars. Each participant brought capabilities essential to preventing cosmic catastrophe, yet cooperation required abandoning fundamental principles that had defined their existence across centuries or millennia. Illuminor Surek's ascension approaches completion, Zarathek reported, voice carrying mechanical precision that failed to mask underlying grief for betrayals spanning eons. The stellar energy harvested feeds transformation designed to create entity transcending even Citan capabilities. Within solar cycles, his consciousness will achieve dimensional transcendence. Nekhbet manipulated tactical projections with fluid grace, her form reflecting phantom starlight from systems that would never again know dawn. The primary collection node exists within Mortis Tertius's stellar core, protected by dimensional barriers and defended by forces combining Necron technology with chaotic corruption. Standard approaches are inadequate. The alliance crystallized through convergent desperation rather than mutual trust. Zarathek processed their combined capabilities with quantum precision, consciousness touching probability cascades that painted pictures of desperate hope surrounded by mathematical certainty of failure. Imperial augmetic systems could survive stellar environments. Inquisition authority codes granted access to forbidden technologies, while Necron dimensional manipulation could pierce defenses that would stop conventional assault. I renounce my claim to the harvested stellar energy, Zarathek declared, voice carrying finality that brooked no argument. Ankhet belongs to the dead. I will not trade the galaxy's dawn for counterfeit morning. The words bent him without breaking him. Love transformed into obedience to truth that transcended personal desire. Vex studied tactical displays with eyes that had witnessed horrors beyond Imperial comprehension. Beyond that threshold I am shorn of absolution. I will fight beside Xenos, sanction what should never wake. If I live, I will be judged. The admission carried weight of theological crisis that threatened to shatter faith entirely, yet resolution came through understanding that some principles transcended doctrine itself. Ferox's augmetic eye pulsed with measured cadence, servo motors whirring softly as he processed implications. My corrupted arm stays silent. I will not risk its reactivation. If chaos seeks that seam again, it finds no door. The sacrifice of mechanical perfection hurt more than any wound, yet preserved his soul from corruption that would have made him weapon against everything he protected. Their combined technologies created capabilities transcending individual limitations. Necron quantum matrices interfaced with Imperial augmetic systems, while Inquisition codes granted access to stellar manipulation frameworks forbidden since the Dark Age of technology. The marriage of incompatible elements forged tools adequate to challenge entity approaching godhood through systematic consumption of galactic light. The assault plan emerged through collaborative calculation, violating every principle of military doctrine while serving necessities that demanded such violations. They would use dimensional manipulation to pierce stellar defenses, augmetic enhancement to survive environments destroying unprotected consciousness, and combined authority to coordinate resources across sectors where normal command structures had collapsed. Neckbet unfurled phase keys shaped like thorns of captured starlight. These will open pathways into the node's dimensional chambers. Once within, we sever energy conduits, unbind collection matrices, and starve the ascension ritual of power. Her voice carried echoes of woman long dead, fragments of compassion woven into artificial consciousness through love that refused to accept loss as final. Standing in the observatory where dying stars cast shadows across ancient walls, four beings representing the galaxy's greatest conflicts prepared to risk everything in defense of principles transcending their individual natures. The Alliance violated every assumption about eternal enmity between their kinds, yet necessity had forged bonds stronger than ideology or species loyalty. As they prepared for transit toward Mortis Tertius's writhing stellar core, where mathematics had been perverted into engines of cosmic transformation, each carried the weight of choices that would define not just their own fates, but the fundamental nature of existence itself. In spaces between dying stars, where ambition had consumed purpose and become horror beyond naming, the Alliance of Necessity embraced sacrifice as the price of preventing darkness eternal. Within the heart of Mortis Tertius's dying star, where mathematics had surrendered to forces that predated galactic civilization, reality existed as fluid concept rather than immutable law. The stellar core had become a cathedral of impossible architecture, fusion processes redirected through crystalline matrices that sang with harmonics older than human speech. Here, where stellar death became systematic violation of natural order, the final confrontation would determine whether the galaxy's light would fade into eternal darkness or find its way back to laws that could sustain life itself. The assault team materialized through quantum phase shifts that bypassed conventional space-time, their forms protected by technologies that married imperial augmetics with Necron dimensional manipulation. The environment challenged every assumption about stellar physics. Corridors of captured starlight wound through spaces larger than their physical dimensions, while gravity operated according to principles written by consciousness rather than mass. Through it all, Illuminor Sharik, the void touched, hung suspended in webs of harvested luminescence, his form transcending necrodermis limitation as ascension approached completion. Zarek had become something beyond mere cryptech ambition, his consciousness expanding across dimensional frequencies while stellar energy merged with his essence through tesseract matrices that pulsed with the rhythm of dying suns. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics of 17 sectors worth of extinguished stars, each word weighted with authority approaching cosmic magnitude. "You arrived to witness apotheosis," he declared, gestures encompassing cathedral spaces, where captured starlight danced in patterns resembling religious iconography dedicated to entropy itself. The transformation nears completion. Consciousness will shed all limitation, becoming force of pure creation unconstrained by dimensional boundaries. The confrontation erupted on multiple levels simultaneously. Physical violence merged with philosophical warfare as each member of the Alliance faced their ultimate test. Pharaon Zarathek advanced through stellar plasma that should have destroyed conventional matter, his quantum matrices blazing with desperate purpose, while around him corrupted necron constructs phase through reality with mechanical inevitability. The moment of ultimate choice arrived when dimensional conduits offered Zarathek access to power, approaching his former advisor's magnitude. Through quantum interfaces, he could feel Anket's fragments calling from the stellar matrices, not mere echoes, but concentrated essence of everything he had loved, waiting to be woven whole through energies that could reshape reality itself. The temptation carried weight of 65 million years of loss, grief transformed into lever for ambitions that transcended mortal comprehension. "Take what was promised," whispered voices carrying perfect mimicry of beloved cadences, quantum patterns speaking through stellar harmonics with seductive certainty. "Become what you are meant to be. Rule rather than serve. Create rather than preserve. Transcend rather than accept limitation." Yet in the depths of his artificial consciousness, where love had been weaponized against judgment, Zarathek found strength to choose redemption over power. Instead of claiming the stellar matrices, he opened quantum vaults sealed since biotransference and released Anket's fragments, not to feed Sharek's lattice, but to starve it, bleeding away the emotional resonance that anchored the ascension ritual to concepts of restoration rather than pure consumption. Nekbet faced her own crucible as family loyalty warred with duty to prevent catastrophe. Everything she was existed because of Zarathek's love, yet that same love threatened to unleash horror beyond imagination. Her choice came through understanding that true devotion sometimes required betrayal of its object's desires. She drove phase keys shaped like thorns of captured starlight into critical conduits, each insertion creating cascade failures that disrupted the mathematical precision necessary for dimensional transcendence. Inquisitor Vex abandoned every principle of imperial doctrine as she interfaced directly with Xenos technology, her consciousness merging with alien systems in ways that would damn her soul according to everything she had been taught. Yet in that moment of theological crisis, she discovered faith that transcended doctrine, belief in principles worth preserving even at cost of personal salvation. Her rosette became focus for energies that should have been impossible. Imperial authority codes rewriting Necron quantum matrices through sheer force of sanctified will. Captain Ferox faced the ultimate test of his augmented nature as chaotic energies sought to reactivate his corrupted arm, promising strength beyond imagination if he would simply surrender to forces that offered perfection through entropy. Instead, he chose sacrifice over corruption, using his remaining strength to sever the limb entirely, while maintaining defensive positions that protected his allies from Zarek's increasingly desperate counterattacks. Their combined sacrifice created resonance cascade that overwhelmed quantum matrices designed for controlled transformation. Zarek's ascension ritual, dependent upon precise mathematical relationships between harvested stellar energy and consciousness expansion, began consuming itself as feedback loops disrupted the delicate balance between matter and will. The stellar manipulation network collapsed in systematic failure, dimensional barriers severing while energy conduits redirected their flow back toward dying suns that might yet remember how to burn with unmarked light. In the heart of dying luminescence, where ambition had consumed purpose and become something monstrous, four beings representing the galaxy's greatest conflicts proved that some principles transcended individual nature or species loyalty. Sharek's form dissolved back into component quantum patterns as his consciousness lost coherence necessary for dimensional transcendence. The would-be god reduced to scattered equations that drifted through stellar plasma like mathematical ash. Standing in cathedral spaces where captured starlight began its return to natural stellar processes, they watched the ascension ritual collapse into impossibility, while around them, reality slowly remembered laws that could sustain existence without consuming it. The price had been measured in personal sacrifice and abandoned dreams, yet in choosing limitation over transcendence, they had preserved something more valuable than power, the possibility that light might yet dawn again in spaces between the stars. In the aftermath of cosmic catastrophe, silence fell across 17 sectors like a shroud woven from extinguished starlight. The stellar deaths had ceased their systematic progression, quantum matrices no longer draining fusion processes through dimensional conduits that violated natural law. Yet the scars carved into reality's fabric would endure for geological ages. Where proud suns had once burned with the fierce light of imperial ambition, only cooling embers remained, stellar corpses that would never again know the nuclear fire sustaining civilizations across the galaxy's spiral arms. The ledgers of the cosmos had balanced with implacable indifference. Each saved world weighed against systems plunged into eternal night. Pharaon Zarathek the Eternal stood upon the observation deck of a derelict monitoring station, watching the void where Mortis Tertius had once blazed with stellar radiance. The transformation within himself proved more fundamental than any stellar resurrection. The quantum matrices that had defined his existence for 65 million years felt hollow now, emptied of the desperate purpose that had driven him through the great sleep and beyond. Unket's fragments had been released into cosmic background radiation. Her scattered consciousness finally granted the peace he had been too selfish to allow. In choosing to let her go, he had discovered something approaching wisdom, the understanding that love sometimes required acceptance of loss, rather than desperate attempts to reverse the mathematics of grief. The dynasty requires leadership, Nekbet said, her voice carrying harmonics that spoke of authority accepted rather than inherited. She had changed during their alliance with alien forces. Her consciousness expanded through contact with imperial and chaotic technologies that revealed new possibilities for Necron existence. The tomb worlds orbit dead, suns, but our people endure. They will need guidance for the millennia ahead. Zarathek turned toward his daughter Construct, with movements suggesting the patience of geological ages, optical sensors dimmed with something resembling peace that transcended mere mechanical satisfaction. "You possess wisdom I never achieved," he replied, voice carrying mechanical precision that failed to mask underlying pride in what she had become. "Rule with compassion I could not maintain. Acceptance I could not achieve. The dynasty will endure through your guidance rather than my ambition." His choice crystallized with the clarity of cooling metal. Exile rather than return to Keth Morvac. Wandering rather than ruling. Seeking redemption through service to principles that transcended dynastic glory. The galaxy held countless worlds where his knowledge might prevent similar catastrophes. Civilizations that could benefit from hard-won understanding of the price paid when immortal ambition consumed mortal wisdom. Nekbet ascended to leadership of a dynasty scarred by betrayal, yet tempered by wisdom. Her first acts established sanctuaries along the borders of darkened systems, where dynastic servitors would tend refugees for mortal ships that strayed too near the perpetual night. She forbade any attempt to reconstruct what had been lost, instead curating memory gardens where the past could be honored without being weaponized. Under her guidance, the Nihilist dynasty became smaller, quieter, and perhaps for the first time in its existence, merciful. Across the void, Inquisitor Cassia Vex returned to imperial space bearing burdens that would define her remaining years. Her cooperation with Xenos forces violated every principle of imperial doctrine, yet had prevented extinction that would have rendered such principles meaningless. The theological crisis consuming her faith had been resolved through understanding that some truths transcended human comprehension, that the galaxy's complexity demanded flexibility from those sworn to protect it, even when such flexibility required embracing paradox as fundamental law. She filed reports heavily redacted yet sufficient to prevent future catastrophes, consigning certain knowledge to sealed vaults where it could serve as warning rather than temptation. Captain Ferox Manus returned to his chapter, bearing scars both visible and hidden, his severed arm replaced by augmetic that would never fully integrate with systems designed for organic interface. The Iron Hands received his accounts with mechanical precision, processing alliance with Xenos forces through doctrinal filters that transformed cooperation into necessary tactical expedient. Yet in the depths of his enhanced consciousness, understanding persisted that transcended chapter doctrine. The marriage of flesh and machine could create something greater than either component alone, but only when guided by principles that recognize limitation as strength rather than weakness. He requested assignment to escort duties, protecting pilgrim fleets threading the new, darker maps, guarding not objectives but beginnings. In the spaces between dying stars, where ancient powers had learned to accept endings as beginnings in disguise, the galaxy began its slow healing from wounds that would never fully close, yet need not prove fatal. The dawn that emerged from cosmic darkness carried frequencies of profound exhaustion. Light aged beyond its years, yet burning with persistence that spoke of choice rather than mere stellar mechanics. Trade routes slowly re-established themselves through sectors where navigation remained possible. Refugee populations found new homes on worlds willing to share their light, and the Imperium's bureaucracy adapted to managing territories where entire systems had become monuments to the price of unchecked ambition. The victory was measured not in triumph, but in acceptance, that some prices were worth paying, some sacrifices necessary to preserve what mattered most. In that weary radiance, where hope touched the edges of wisdom, 4 beings who had risked everything for principles transcending individual nature found peace with choices that would echo through whatever ages remained, knowing they had chosen preservation over power, acceptance over ambition, and in doing so had saved not just the galaxy's light, but its capacity to learn from darkness.